Welcome to Spread the Word,
a podcast brought to you by Biz. Our mission is to interview and share perspectives on gender to our community. You're here with Audrey, Sydney, Ahana, Isha,
Liz,
Serena,
Megan, Shreya,
Sajal, and Aaron.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Spread the Word. In this episode, Sajal and I interviewed Sabrina Zhang, a student at IMSA, about her different experiences with gender roles and norms in an immigrant household and in a rural community, different beauty standards pressed upon women, and double standards between men and women, and much more. We're really excited for this episode, and we hope you all enjoy it.
So our first question is, how did your culture and your upbringing affect your beliefs regarding gender or gender roles while you were growing up?
Yeah, that's a really interesting first question. Wow. Okay. I think that there are a couple different ways how it affected me. Obviously, young girls are more inclined to be influenced by their surroundings, whether it be the media and body image, or just how a woman should necessarily act, if that makes sense. So their mannerisms and stuff like that. And so in Chinese culture, women are typically kind of pinned to be, the homemakers. They're not necessarily seen as a very prominent figure in the family. It's usually the men who get work, and it's probably, you've heard about this in culture before, but in my family at least, my parents are they aren't very educated in the sense of getting schooling, and so I think it was really hard because they had all these different beliefs ingrained in them. So in China, there's a lot of beauty standards, so women ideally won't have to be pale. And so I grew up playing sports, and so I remember there was this one instance where I went outside, and we tan really easily because my family's from the South and we grew up with farmers. And I remember I went outside and I got really tan after a softball game, and my parents were really disappointed because they're oh my gosh, she's gonna get so dark. And I remember distinctly my parents my dad told me oh, a woman is not desirable if she's dark, you know what I mean? And I don't think they had any malicious intent behind it. I think that's just the way that they perceived women, and especially in the village that they grew up in. And it kind of goes hand in hand with how they perceive women. And I think the other thing is I think my parents did a good job with straying away from this, but I know with my cousins and our other families, women, the girls in the family were told they were told to cook and clean, and the guys were seen as more prestiged and put on a pedestal. So my parents would always praise my brother, and it would just kind of be for instance, we can go back to the body image thing. When I was little, my parents wanted me to keep a nice figure because girls have to be skinny, and they can't be fat or whatever, because it all goes back to you can't marry a man. And I remember my brother was super skinny, and they let him eat whatever he wanted, and my parents wouldn't let me do that because I was a girl and I had to keep my figure. So I think it was just the small nuances like that. And I think it was more of an uneducated, my parents are uneducated, of course, and also the cultural beauty standards and stuff like that kind of led to me having a lot of insecurities when I was growing up, obviously. And it took me a long time to kind of grow out of that, but I think I'm a lot more aware now, and I'm kind of grateful that I had those experiences, just because I know that a lot of people do struggle with that type of stuff, and especially because it's ingrained in our culture, and also Western culture as well, with diet culture and stuff like that. And so I think it's just made me more aware, and I've had a lot of self-discovery and a lot of questions growing up, but I think now I'm in a place where I'm more comfortable to talk about it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So then kind of a follow-up question to that, do you think that your parents over the years have kind of lightened up on you in terms of you have to fit this certain beauty standard, or do you think even still today they're Brina, you can't do that, no man is gonna want you, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think it's a little less intense than it was when I was like 7 or 8, but it's definitely like it's still there in bits and pieces because although it's not like pressured and it doesn't affect my life like on a daily basis now, it's still like little things like, oh, Sabrina, like, because my mom got double eyelid surgery when she was like my age, a little maybe a little older, but it's like it's in bits and pieces like, oh, like you would look prettier if you got like this surgery, or oh, you would look prettier if like this and this and this. So it's not more so like as damaging as it was like with your like with I guess like when I was little, like with the whole you can't be tan and you can't like eat this and you can't eat that. It's a lot less severe than that, but it's definitely like it's still prevalent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I can only just imagine as a child, because I went through like a very pretty similar experience, you know, immigrant parents, I think, you know, a lot of shared experiences. But yeah,
I was just gonna say, I can definitely relate to like what you're talking about with like your parents talking about how you couldn't get too tan or else like you wouldn't be able to get married, because like I was taught that a lot when I was younger too. And it was also like with height, like my parents always told me like they really hope I don't get too tall because I won't be able to get married that way. So I think like a lot of people can relate to that, especially as females.
yeah. I'm also, oh,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say too, like literally because I had went to day camp as a child, like summer camp, and we would be playing outside, and I remember when I would go to church, everyone would be like, "You're so dark. Like, what happened to you? Like, you got so dark," and they would say it in such a negative way that I wouldn't even want to go outside anymore. The sense that there's such an association with dark being like disgusting and ugly and like something you have to avoid. And it's like prevalent in all cultures, like all cultures that I've seen. Like, it's like dark is horrible, light is good. The lighter you are, the more men will want you or people will want you, and just be light. Don't, like, if you're dark, then you're ugly. Horrible concept. Horrible concept.
Yeah, I think what Sadal said, and like this kind of correlates to what you just said, but I think that like really like resonated with my like childhood because I loved playing sports and I'm like more of an athletic person. Like I love playing sports. I like exercising. And it was just it's kind of damaging because my brother, like he was a runner and I just played like whatever sports. Like I play basketball, I play tennis, I play whatever. And it was really like damaging and like insulting when my parents told me to like, oh, girls aren't supposed to play sports, like you're supposed to be like nice and skinny and dainty. And I was the opposite of that. Like I think I grew up with more like Western ideals because like, you know, typically like Asian girls ideally are like, you know, they're small, they're petite, they're skinny. You know, there's that like one trend or whatever with like the piece of paper. It's like if your waist was like smaller than the piece of paper, like the 8x11, like you were deemed like pretty. And so I think that like when I was a kid, and I was like a little like pudgy too, and like, you know, like most kids are, and I think it was just like really damaging when my parents told me like, oh my god, like you have to control your diet, you can't like play this anymore, you're gonna get bulky. And then my brother could do all that because he was nice and skinny. And even like last week, like I was talking to my mom because like my brother is also like my younger brother's like a little heavier, like on the heavier side, and that's how I kind of was like growing up too. And so I was like, oh mom, like remember when you told me to like, you know, stop, you know, eating as much? And she's like, oh well, you know, the difference is that you were a girl and like he's gonna grow more into it because he's a guy. And I was like, that in what world does that make sense? So I don't know, that kind of like sparked something in me, but yeah,
this is something I kind of do want to touch on too. Like the double standards are like insane. Like, so when I don't, for everyone listening, I have 2 older brothers, and so I'm like the youngest, and I'm a girl. Lucky for me, I guess. Not really. But anyways, I remember they would not pick on me, but it's kind of more like toughening me up, I guess. I mean, it kind of helps now because I think I have tougher skin, but like, you know, it's like slight, like fake, like punches and all that stuff, you know, like toughening up your little baby sister. And then when I would fight back, I would get in trouble. And I would be like, so what do you want me to do? Like, just stand there and not defend myself? They're like, no, but you're a girl. Like, you can't play rough like a boy. And I'm like, what? So you literally just like want me to get like you want me to stand there and like scream for mommy and daddy to come help me? Like no. Like I have to like, like things like that. So it's like they're not getting in trouble for instigating something with their little sister, but it's the little sister that's getting in trouble for fighting for herself. Interesting.
Well, then the next question would be, how have your beliefs regarding gender changed over time?
Okay, that's a really interesting question too. I think so there's like two major things I think of. So I think the first one is gender roles and the second is gender overall. So I'll go on the gender roles thing first. I think like ever since I was little, like I've always been like a very strong spirit. And I kind of like called out my parents' BS, like even when I was younger, because like as a little kid, like you're more prone to believe that type of stuff, but there's some things that you just can't believe because they're way too outrageous. Like I remember my parents told me about like, when my grandma's, they did like foot binding and like all that different like the beauty standards, and they were talking about like how women have to like uphold this certain, like gender norms. And I just thought it was very damaging. Like I know I use the word damaging a lot, but I think it truly was, because like when you're a kid, like you don't focus on like what you want to wear, like you don't focus on like money or like what you want, like what you look like. You focus on like, oh, like I'm gonna go to the lemonade stand after school with my friends. Like you don't focus on that type of stuff. And so I think like ever since I was little, it was easier for me to believe the type of stuff they were saying, although I didn't believe it. But as I got older, I started to rebel more, and it perpetuated their idea of like, oh my gosh, like teenage girls, like all they do is rebel. But I think at that point, like over time, I slowly started to realize, like after I started educating myself and I ingrained myself into like society, and I had like more diverse perspectives, whether it be from my friends or from just like people who I just interacted with like at my parents' restaurant. I think that like over time, my parents didn't realize that experience and educating yourself like really makes a difference in your beliefs, because they never had that. I was grateful enough to have that opportunity. So I think that along with time and immersing myself into more diverse perspectives, I had an easier time steering away from those gender norms. And like of course, like I suffered with like eating disorders because of my body image, and I suffered with like a lot of things like throughout that period of time, which is like unfortunate, but like it happened because of like I questioned a lot of stuff. But I think like it kind of led me to a point where now I'm more firm in what I believe in, and I'm more firm because I know that like what I believe in is like I have a right to believe in it. Like I have a right to believe that there shouldn't be these like toxic gender norms like surrounding young girls, especially like in these like immigrant households, or like especially like Asian households, when they pride their children on like what they look like and they're very obsessed with their image. And I think like with gender overall, I like had like a lot of like I questioned a lot of it, because like when I was little, I was a tomboy. I did not like playing dress up. I really liked going outside and like playing in dirt and stuff like that, and I played a lot of sports. And I think when I was little, I didn't realize that like, because I knew that girls around me wore dresses, and I didn't like that. Like I remember my mom put me in a dress and I would just cry because I just hated wearing dresses. But I didn't realize that what my mom was doing was part of a gender norm. I just thought it was just because like she wanted me to look pretty, but I didn't necessarily correlate that with being a girl, like in quotes, a girl. And so as I got older and as I got more comfortable with like my identity and my sexuality, I think I had like a lot of like doubts, because my friends in middle school would always challenge that too. It wasn't even just like my family and my culture. It was more of like trying to balance like what I learned at home and what these people at school were telling me as well. And so I think like there's definitely like a lot of stuff that was like not against me, but that really confused me a lot more, because I was like, oh my God, like am I meant to like dress up like this? Am I really not meant to like wear sweatpants and like sweatshirts every day? Like what's going on? Am I supposed to look pretty? And so, but I think along with time, like I said earlier, I think along with time, like especially when I got to IMSA, I just realized that like these gender roles were like set up by like misinformation and like miseducation. And I think that I'm definitely like a lot more comfortable like my identity today, obviously, but it took like a lot of time and healing to get to like where I was or where I currently am.
So yeah, you kind of brought up a point that I kind of wanted to pick up on. So you said like kind of the area you're in kind of really came in conflict, I guess, with what you were exposed to at home. So I was wondering, like, could you go more into that, like specifically because you're from like a rural, is it rural
Yeah.
South? So like, how do you think that like also like kind of affected like you growing up and your understanding of things in general?
So I think that in a way it sort of helped because Western culture, like regarding like gender, has definitely changed a lot over the past couple of years. And like obviously Chinese culture hasn't really. I mean they have, but it's not as prominent. So I guess like when I was little, girls around me, like there were girls around me, like when I went to kindergarten, whatever, that didn't like wear dresses. They wore like, you know, overalls and like they wore whatever they wanted, right? And my mom like always like dressed me up in like pretty clothes. And you know, I never understood why everyone around me was like, why is this girl like wearing like a bunch of these dresses all the time? And I was just like, I don't think it was much of like a conflict in like culture. I think this was more of a conflict in like my parents' beliefs and like everyone else's beliefs, because like everyone around me realistically like no one cares what you wear in kindergarten unless it's like a shirt with like a profane symbol or like message. Like no one's really gonna care. And I also think that like along with like being in a rural area, there was like some good in that, like where people didn't care like what you wore, but there's also like a lot of bad that came out of that, because like I think along with like my parents like perpetuating like the gender norms, people in my area didn't really have a grasp on that, because like I live, like you said, I live in a very rural area and people aren't usually as woke or like aware of like current issues, you know what I mean? And people here today are still like failing to grasp the idea of that gender is just a societal construct and or a social construct. And so like and like when I was little, it didn't really affect me because you know, obviously everyone thinks the same like when you're a kid, like no one really cares about that. But like as I got older, like there were people in my school who were homophobic, and there were people in my school who were like, oh, like why are like guys shouldn't wear dresses and girls shouldn't wear suits, and like so on and so forth. And I kind of unfortunately fell into that trap because like, you know, when everyone around you like believes the same thing, like it's kind of like hard to get out of it. It's like mob mentality, and I'm kind of like ashamed to say that, but like it's a true, very true statement. And along with that, like my parents also grew up in a rural area, but in China too. So that plus like all the like there are very unaccepting kids at my school really perpetuated this notion of like, oh my god, like maybe this is who I was meant to be, like maybe I was meant to fit in this cookie cutter like image. So I think like just like in a summary or whatever, in a nutshell, I think that like when I was little it didn't affect me as much, but as I got older I realized how damaging it was, and I realized how horrible it was, because people here like truly aren't very open-minded, to be honest. And it's really hard to like change that perception in like a small town. But like I said, it's easier for me now because I'm at IMSA, and I'm sure you understand too. But
yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's like interesting too, especially when everyone around you thinks one way. And I feel like that is kind of IMSA though too. Like there's obviously some people who have like very different opinions, and I think there is a difference between having like a hurtful, hateful opinion and just having a different opinion. And I do feel for some people who have like different opinions that aren't hateful, but in like the context of where we are, it seems like if you just think a little bit differently, then like, or not a little bit, just if you think differently, then people will really come at you, you know, if you have a different opinion, not a hateful, having a hateful different opinion, I think different. But yeah, I don't know, that was kind of a blurb to just kind of say I can relate.
So the next question could be, what ways do you think that like we as a society can combat these harmful gender stereotypes that you've been talking about?
I think that so far, I think like Western, like I said before, like I think Western culture or like our society here, we're a lot more progressive than like the people like back home are. And I think that like I did some research on this. I think there are feminist movements that are trying to happen and stuff, but obviously it's not as easy to start one because like censorship like in government, and like everyone's kind of conformed to like feel the same way. No one is like really compelled to speak out. And so I think that like honestly, I think the best way to move forward is just like to encourage people to like immersify themselves and educate themselves. And I know it's not as easy as it is like for me to say, and it definitely took me like a really, really long time to get rid of those like different stereotypes and those harmful like notions. But I think I genuinely think that like that's what helps me through, at least, because I feel like I would have never known about like gender, like the gender construct, and like how it's like ingrained in our society, and how we like as a society told boys to wear blue and girls to wear pink. I would have never known that. I just automatically, like, my brain automatically like thought that. But I think that it's really important to stay aware and to like want to stay aware about things, because I think that the reason why people aren't necessarily as receptive or open to different ideas, especially like with gender, is because that we are evolving in like a very fast state today. And I think that people in our generation are very progressive, and they want to progress forward in society, whether it mean being more accepted or being more accepting too. And I think that being apathetic and choosing not to like surround yourself, or choosing not to like immersify yourself into something that does affect like your friends, or does affect like some people you love, is really harmful. And I think that truly like I know like it's a very generic and simple answer, but I think just being aware is just a very, very important thing in our society, especially today, because I think that there are a lot of harmful stereotypes and harmful concepts that we have to get rid of, especially because like it's very damaging, and it leads to like a lot of different things, like mental illness, or like eating disorders, or just a lot of like bad things that you don't want to happen to you, obviously, or like our society. And so I think the number one thing you can do is like be involved, be just open and receptive, being open and receptive, and just like be like, even if you aren't knowledgeable about the subject, especially with the gender construct, like gender norms and stuff like that, be supportive about people who are trying to speak out, and just keep like an open heart and an open mind, because I think that when people do want to combat these issues, they don't necessarily want to be greeted with like, oh, like I don't think that's right, because like I think this is what Liz was saying earlier, like there's a difference between like having a different opinion and like a harmful opinion. And I think trying to like understand where someone is coming from isn't necessarily like a harmful opinion, but once you start bashing them because you yourself are uneducated and choose not to immersify yourself into like a different environment, is a harmful notion. Yeah.
And I think too, like, I feel like there's way more progress, like looking at where we are now versus like 5 years ago. I feel like there's just I don't know how to describe it. It's like, for instance, I was on LinkedIn, and now there's an option to like put your pronouns in. And like, I see like now in Instagram and stuff, people like put their pronouns and things like that. Like, I feel like maybe even a little bit less than 5 years ago, like it was just not a thing, you know? And it's interesting to see how like these things are kind of happening like quicker and quicker, you know? But yeah. I think, just being like more inclusive of people, and just understanding that like people, we're all different, we're all unique, like we're all beautiful, but we just have different experiences, and respecting those experiences and those feelings and those thoughts and actions and so on and so forth. The list goes on.
And just like one more thing to add on, this might be like a little sidetrack, but I saw on TikTok, this one girl, she came out to her parents, and she was like, I think she was Muslim, and she had immigrant parents, and she came out, and they weren't necessarily like the most accepting people, just because like, you know, it's ingrained in like different cultures, and like obviously people aren't going to be accepting. And I think something that they said was really profound. I'm trying to think. I think they said that even if they will never understand, because like although they didn't like I think they came out to like their grandma too, and their grandmother, like, she didn't understand like what was happening, but she was still supportive of them. Because, you know, I think, yeah, but I think that like what I took away from that was I think like even if people like around you aren't accepting, or even if you yourself like aren't like knowledgeable or understanding of like what's happening, like regarding of someone else's gender like issues or your own, if you're having like a crisis or like a internal crisis or whatever, I think that like the best thing you can do is just support, like even if you don't like necessarily understand like why they're doing it or like why they feel that way. I think it's a really important thing to like acknowledge that you do want to like, they're your loved ones at the end of the day, and they're not going to change their opinion for other people's opinions, or I mean not their opinion, like their identity for other people's opinions. So I think that like regardless of like whether you do necessarily understand or not, I think being supportive and being open-minded is a really, really good thing to have, because it means the world to somebody who is like going through something like that. So yeah.
A really nice one to end off on. This
was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for listening in. That's all we had for the podcast today. And stay tuned for our next episode. Yeah. Okay. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this episode of our podcast. And for more Beas content, follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our channel, both at Beas_IMSA in all caps. And until next time, spread the word.